again thank our members in particular and our friends as well, but in particular our members for your support during this what's been described as pandemic and COVID-19. You've just been very faithful and loyal in terms of your support of the church, and I want to thank you and commend you for that, and to remind you that there are three ways to give. First, you may give online, thembc.org, and you can download the Easy Tithe app. You can give by text on your mobile phone. The number is 215-709-3898. That's 215-709-3898. Second way to give is you can mail your tithes and offerings to the church. Someone is there during the week on weekdays to take your offerings that you leave in the mailbox, church's mailbox. And the office number, of course, is 4948 Locust Street, Philadelphia, PA 19139. 4948 Locust Street, 19139. You can not mail it, you can drop it off at the church office. And as I said, someone will be there to collect. Also want you to join us in some exciting additions. Of course, CrossFit is about the third week for CrossFit, but very excited about this opportunity that you have for exercising at home. You can exercise in the comfort of your own home on Wednesday mornings at 10 a.m. live on Facebook and YouTube. Brother Allen Stepney, one of the fine young men in our church. He grew up in Monumental. I baptized him, and he has gone through school and earned a doctorate degree, and I'm proud of him. He is taking us through the exercises, and of course, we have added Throwback Thursdays, which I'm also very excited about. And last Thursday, of course, the one of my lectures, in fact, the first lecture that I gave at the Hampton Ministers Conference several years ago, I won't say how many, but several years ago, was aired, and many of you have joined Monumental, of course, since I did those lectures, and so many have heard about them, and you were able to at least see the recording of that original lecture. And I guess 1994 was the first lecture, so I guess you say I haven't changed much, right? Thank you for saying that. But that's Throwback Thursdays, and so every Thursday at 7 o'clock on Facebook and YouTube, you'll be able to see one of the past sermons from yesteryear, or a concert from one of our concerts that our choirs have done. But that's very exciting, I think, for us to be able to share those kind of memories and go back in time and see that. So God bless you and thank you for that. Now, I want us to begin as usual with prayer. And by now you may know the categories that our prayers ought to include in these times. We want to pray for our world, which is constantly shrinking, getting smaller and smaller, and we've seen how what affects people in on one part of the planet can affect everybody on the whole planet. So we want to be in prayer. It's no longer them over there, or people we don't know anything about or don't care anything about. We're all a global community, and what happens on one end of the planet affects us all. We want to pray for our nation, that our leaders will make decisions that are made through wisdom, and not just because of pressure that some people are bringing to bear, or for political reasons, but decisions that are reasoned out and made that benefit all of us. And I might say this: I know that it seems like there's a little light at the end of the tunnel, and that things are opening up in many states across the nation, even in Pennsylvania, a relaxing of some of the former restrictions. But let me say this: just because um, the government gives you permission to go places, doesn't mean that you need to go. I think that we need to be very cautious and be very careful, uh, and um, and very slow about uh, um, about how we go forward. So please, let's be prayerful as we go forward, that we don't wind up in a worse condition than we are now. Just because the governor says you can go to the beach on Memorial Day doesn't mean you got to go to the beach. Make your own beach in your backyard or in your living room. Um, yes, there are some things that we can do without, and so let's be very mindful and prayerful. Want to pray for our churches, because our churches are going through very difficult times. As you can imagine, I don't need to tell you what kind of challenges churches are going through now, in terms of not being able to come together physically in our buildings and to worship God. Uh, it's the building is the centering of our faith, in terms of being able to come together, because that's the way God intended. We can't do that now. So we want to be very, very prayerful, um, so that we can remain the church as much as possible, even though we cannot meet at the church. Pray for our pastors who are seeking to lead in some very uh, different and difficult times, and we're learning as we go. We're um, uh, adjusting to new things and new ways to try to be connected with our members. And so pray for pastors everywhere. Let's pray for those who are on the front lines, doctors and nurses, and those who respond, putting their own lives in jeopardy and at risk for the health and well-being and safety of others. Pray for our communities, with added to the virus, other challenges that have always plagued our communities, that are exacerbated in times like these. So let's be prayerful as well for them. And we want to pray for our children. Sometimes we forget them, and um, assuming that they'll be all right, but they're not all right, and so we want to explain and love them, and let them know that through all of this they are loved, and that they're cared for. The best thing we can give our children is our own love, so that they will feel and know that they are supported, and they are secure. And we have the reality is that children are getting this virus, and so people who say, well, there's certain people who are immune, or some certain people who are not going to get it, that only the elderly will get it, only those who have preconditions are going to get it. And we've seen that is not true, that the elderly can get it, the young can get it, children can get it. And so let's be prayerful for our children, and also as they as their teachers and as educators, also trying to figure out the best way for learning to take place, because it's a very difficult environment for learning. Uh, especially in such a large school system as Philadelphia, and figuring out how to move forward, even later on in the year. How do we have school? How do we learn? So we want to be prayerful for those who are making decisions about our children's future and our children's education, and for all of the young people who um, have had to forego graduations and proms, and the virtual graduations, of course, next best thing and wonderful technology, but certainly not what we would have wanted for them and what they would have wanted for themselves. So we want to be in prayer for them. And finally, we want to pray that this this night of horror will soon be over, and we trust God. Um, uh, and we trust God, who is able, if it is His will, to intervene in ways that only God can do and will do, um, so that this will soon pass, and we will be looking back from the other side. So let us pray together. Eternal God, our Father, we come now at the end of the day. Thank you for the day, and thank you for being with us in our coming in, our going out, in all seasons, in all types of weather, in all circumstances. You are with us. Even though we find it difficult sometimes to see where you are and to understand your ways, and even to understand why we're in the situation we're in, we still trust you. We still love you. We still believe that you're God. So our faith is unshakable. Sometimes faith weakens, sometimes under pressure, sometimes faith weakens under testing. But through it all, we remain faithful. We remain uh, believers. We remain uh, part of your family. So continue to be with us. Bless the world. Bless our communities. Bless our countries. Bless our children. Bless our churches, our pastors. Bless those who on the front line of this disease. Bless those who families are suffering great loss and who are unable to mourn as they traditionally have done. Be with us during this study, and open our hearts and minds to receive this word. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. We're going to continue, and I want us to keep, of course, on the back burner the fact that we're still talking about love, and of course we haven't specifically talked about it in quite a while, but we're still dealing with that last verse of 1 Corinthians 13, where Paul ends this great chapter on love and says, "And now abideth these three: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. These three remain," he says, and faith, hope, and love. And so we're looking at each one of them, and we're still on faith, because faith, uh, there's a lot to deal with faith, and the Bible as you have seen in the last few weeks, has a lot to say about faith, and we're going to take our time and on the journey, and continue this wonderful chapter, which is chapter 11 of Hebrews. So I want to give you a moment to um, um, turn to Hebrews, the 11th chapter. I think too we ought to recognize that so many of our hymns have to do with faith. Um, there's a hymn called "O for a Faith That Will Not Shrink, Though Pressed by Every Foe, that will not tremble on the brink of any earthly woe." That's one of the older hymns that may not be familiar to us. "Great is thy faithfulness," which I'm sure is quite familiar to all of us, um, inspired by the book of Lamentations. Great is thy faithfulness, morning by morning, new mercies I see. All I have needed thy hand has provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me. The great hymn of our faith. And one of my sayings is that even when uh, when we're not faithful to God, God is always faithful to us. Then there's another hymn, my faith looks up to thee, O Lamb of Calvary. There's a hymn we used to sing on Father's Day and on Mother's Day. Faith, we used to sing Faith of Our Fathers on Father's Day. Some of you may remember. And we used to sing Faith of Our Mothers on Mother's Day. And then there's another old hymn entitled My Faith Has Found a Resting Place. And so even when we look at sacred music and our hymns, we see so much that is written about faith. But we're in Hebrews chapter 11, and we are um, witnessing a procession of men and women who are coming across the stage one by one, and uh, you know it's you've seen fashion shows, and I've seen fashion shows. You've been in fashion shows, and the model comes out, uh, whether male or female, comes up on the stage, and then some a narrator describes what the model is wearing, and the model stays there a period of time until the narrator finishes saying about what the model is wearing, and then the model will come off of the stage and move out, and another one comes, and the narrator will begin over and over again. So whatever kind of analogy you kind of want to use or picture in your mind, or just a stage, and you're sitting in the audience, and there's a narrator. The narrator is the writer of Hebrews, and the writer of Hebrews is saying, "Listen, I want to lift up uh, some men and women of faith," and then as he does that, or even before he does that, he tells us what faith is. He he lays out for us uh, his understanding of faith, and then he brings these persons on the stage and tells us why this particular person fits the profile of faith. And again, always we need to keep before us Hebrews 11:1. Now, faith is the what? Substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. And then in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 6, these are the two key verses in the chapter that present faith before us, and then we allow to see these persons who come along who exemplify these definitions. So you have Hebrews 1:1, Hebrews 11:1, then you have Hebrews 11:6, which says, without faith, what? It is impossible to please God, because and I'm paraphrasing now, first have to believe that God is, and that he is a reward of those who diligently seek him. Now, we've already had, 4 or 5 who have, 4 or 5 models, if you wish, or 4 or 5 persons who have come across the stage, and the writer of Hebrews uh, has told us something about his faith, his or her faith. Um, Abel, uh, Enoch, Noah, Abraham, and Sarah. Now, Sarah's in the list because, of course, Sarah was Abraham's wife, and the promise had to be fulfilled through her. She's the woman, she's the mother who would bear the son, um, that would be the launching pad for the ancestors that would come after. And keep in mind, these, the promise wasn't just you gonna have a kid and maybe one grandchild. No, the promise was you're gonna have so many descendants that uh, you couldn't, if you can count the number of stars in the sky, you could count your descendants. Or if you could count the number of um, of grains in the seashore, uh, you would know how many. And the whole point is you can't count them. So there's going to be this multitude, uh, this multitude of ancestors, and it is Sarah who is going to bear the child, who's Isaac, and of course uh, their descendants and their descendants and their descendants would eventually make up the nation of Israel. So we've dealt with Abraham and Sarah, and then remember last week we talked about that there are what what is called biblical motifs, motifs, themes that run through the Bible, and one of those themes we said is that theme of pairing uh, the three names of these major patriarchs. Patriarch is the head of a family: Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. At least seven times throughout the Bible. And why is that? It's because it, the, when God says, "I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob," or when He is referred to as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that that identifies the God of Israel. So you can't confuse the God of Israel with the God of the gods of the Canaanites, or the Amorites, or the Philistines, or the Edomites, or any of the other nations. You know this is God because He is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the one God. Uh, and so this motif runs through because it is Abraham, as we said last week, who passes down the faith to Isaac, because only way that faith can be transferred is by a human being. And so here is Abraham, uh, who passes down faith to Isaac, and then Isaac passes down the faith to Jacob. And so you have these three that are always, in sermons, you've heard me many times, and I'm sure many other preachers talk about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and we say it in our prayers. We say it in sermons. We study them together because it's father, son, and grandson, and the reason why they are mentioned is because of the faith that they inherit, and then the faith that they pass down. Uh, what I want to do today, though, is then move to um, our next person, and that is Joseph. And so I want us to turn to Hebrews, the 11th chapter. Get my Bible here, and I'm going to give you a chance also to turn to the 11th chapter and see what it says. And remember, we're bringing them onto the stage because the writer of Hebrews, um, you know, we won't go into who wrote Hebrews. Traditionally, it was thought that perhaps Paul wrote Hebrews. It's 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 um, it's debated who wrote Hebrews, but we know it was we know it was someone who is writing to Jewish Christians. Um, some scholars call him the preacher, for want of a better name for him. That here is a first century preacher who is preaching a sermon, and Hebrews is the sermon, long sermon, but Hebrews is the sermon that he's preaching. So we can call him the preacher. It's fine, I guess. Um, and so let's see what the preacher has to say about our next person. Drum roll, please. Our next person. Thank you for the drum roll. It says in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 22. Now we've gone through the other ones. Now by faith, Joseph. Let's stop there because again, this phrase by faith is a reoccurring phrase in the 11th chapter of Hebrews. By faith, Abel. By faith, Enoch. By faith, Noah. By faith, Abraham. By faith, Isaac. By faith, Jacob. It's a preface uh, to the person's name because once once the name is mentioned, then the preacher is going to tell us something about the faith of that person. And so here we go again. By faith, Joseph, when his end was near, speaking about death, spoke about the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt and gave instructions about his bones. My. By faith, Joseph, when his end was near, spoke about the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt and gave instructions about his bones. Now, um, questions that are coming up would be what instructions? What about his bones? What about the Exodus? You know, but to answer those questions, we want to look a little further into the life of Joseph because it's interesting. It's interesting how some of these persons who are coming on the stage, very little is said about them. Now, it doesn't mean they are of lesser importance just because maybe only one verse is devoted to them. There's only one verse devoted to Isaac, for instance, verse 20. Only one verse voted. Only one verse devoted to Jacob, verse 21. Uh, Maybe two verses or one verse devoted to Noah. Maybe one or two devoted to Enoch. Of course, Abraham has many verses, but then when we get to Joseph, there's only one verse, but there's so much about Joseph um, that that causes him to be mentioned here. But those verses are not found here; they are found in the actual story of Joseph's life, which is in the book of Genesis. So there are 13 chapters in the book of Genesis devoted to this one man, Joseph. And I would say that's a lot of verses. And one of the things too we need to recognize when we talk about biblical names is that sometimes um, your question is which Joseph are we talking about? Because uh, the name Joseph is a very popular name in biblical times. Um, there are two Josephs in the New Testament that readily come to mind. Uh, Mary's husband was named Joseph, right? And of course, we know about Joseph in when we read the beginning of the book of Matthew, and how the angel comes to Joseph and tells Joseph, go ahead and marry Mary, because what's going on is not about you or Mary, it's about God, and she's going to bear uh, the Son of God, and you should name him Jesus. That's one Joseph. There's another Joseph mentioned in the Gospels, Joseph of Arimathea, and we meet him toward the end of the Gospels, because once Jesus is crucified, it is Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus who come and ask for his body, and take his body down from the cross and bury it, and of course we know, um, you know, that he's buried in what Joseph's new tomb, borrowed tomb. The tomb that Jesus was buried in was Joseph's tomb, Joseph of Arimathea. So we know that he was a man of some wealth and some means, but he was a believer. So you have those two Josephs in the New Testament. This Joseph in the Old Testament is the Joseph, of course, that we're talking about, and he, of course, is the next in line with this promise of 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 um of ancestry. So you have Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. We don't usually put the four together, but Joseph is the next to the oldest son of Jacob. And so when we want to look at Joseph, always for a clue of a biblical person's identity and life, we ask, well, what does the name mean? Because in biblical times, the naming of a person was very significant, and we do that today, I think, to some extent still. We're given names with certain meanings, or uh, if you talk to people long enough, well, how did you get your first and middle name? You got your first name from this family member, and uh, a middle name from another family member for the maiden name of the mother. And so there's usually some rhyme and reason of how we're named. Of course, my naming is obviously name that my father had, Jesse, and then the name Jesse is part of our ancestry. So the first Jesse was born in the about 1860s, and so mine is about the fourth uh, person in my family who has the name Jesse, and of course my youngest son has the same name. So there's normally a a rhyme and reason for the naming of a child. Um, Biblical naming is a little different though, because it's not necessarily based on ancestry or anything like that. It is kind of uh, a reference to God's work, God's handiwork. What is it? What should be the mission or purpose of this child? See, um, and so that name kind of connects with the child's identity, um, and that's why going back a little bit further, um, Jacob's name, the name Jacob means supplanter, and Jacob was a very supplant means to, dig up and create, create confusion. And if you know, early on, Jacob was a very, um, 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 yeah, he was a rascal and stole his brother's birthright. I mean, he had a good name because that's what he was. But then, if you recall, as he was preparing to meet his brother Esau, who he had wronged, is when he wrestled with the angel, and angel asked him his name. He said, "My name is Jacob." He said, "No, no longer." The angel said, "No longer will you be named Jacob, but you will be named Israel, because you have striven with God." And so from that point on, you'll see in the biblical narrative sometimes the name Jacob, but also sometimes the name Israel, because then he becomes uh, the, the the grandson father of the Israelite people. Kind of the people are named after him in a sense. But the name Joseph means increase, or an, another meaning is it means another son. And an interesting name because it could either refer to the fact that when Rachel gave birth to Joseph, um, God gave her another son after Joseph, whose name was Benjamin. Benjamin was the youngest of the 12 sons. So it could refer to the fact that Rachel is looking to the future, even when this son Joseph is born, that God is going to give me an additional son, or it could refer to the fact that Joseph himself had two sons. One was Ephraim, Manasseh, the oldest, and Ephraim, the youngest son. So it's interesting how the naming of Joseph takes place, because he is given a name, and then that name has meaning in terms of his life and the life of his family. I want to mention four stages in Joseph's life, which I think um, we have to go over in order to see, because remember, where are we going? We're trying to see why is Joseph in on this list, and it's got to be more than just he's on the list because he's the son of Jacob. What other compelling reason would the preacher take up the space on this page, or take up time in his sermon to call the name Joseph? And that's what we're trying to get at, because we want to see in Joseph um, a life of faith. The whole Joseph narrative is about faith. The Actually, a few years ago, I just recalled I preached a series of sermons on Joseph that some of you may remember, and I titled it "From Pit to Palace," because it kind of traced Joseph's life from the beginning until till the end, from pit to palace. So within that framework, there are four stages in Joseph's life, and the first one, of course, is that Joseph is his father's favorite son, and you know that's that's what the book says. So now we go back to the story of Joseph that's found in the book of Genesis, and it begins at the 37th verse. Because as I said before, chapters 37, from chapter 37 all the way to the end of the book, is the main character here is this man named Joseph. I think too, while we're talking about Joseph and all of these lessons in faith, is to ask ourselves, and not just in terms of Enoch's faith and Abraham's faith and Jacob's faith and Joseph's faith, but how does how is faith defined for us today with all of what we're going through? Um, what does faith look like in our lives today? We know what it looked like in the lives of these great patriarchs, these great men and women. Uh, let's translate that to our day and to us specifically. You are a Sarah, you are an Enoch, you are an Abraham, you are Joseph. How does faith speak to you now? What is faith saying to us about what we're going through, and and not only about what we're going through, but what are we holding on to at a time like this, and who are we putting our trust in? I think every sermon I've preached in the last few weeks has hit on um, this this notion that that there's just so many voices speaking to us today, claiming to be the expert or claiming to have the answer. Um, so much floating on the internet today. Um, so many choices we have, even when we're listening to preachers and sermons and what there's just so many voices. Um, but what is the voice that we're listening to, and what does that voice have to say about our faith? See, now when we look at the stages in Joseph's life, and we talk about from pit to palace, um, the first stage is that again he is favored, and here it is in Genesis chapter 37, and it says in verse 3, right in the beginning of the chapter, Israel loved Joseph. Now remember, Israel's other name is Jacob, but here he's called Joseph. Says Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons. Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons. Now, that's I'm sure you're saying, "Uh-oh," because this can mean a whole lot. There's a whole lot that's going to go on just based on that. You know, and the reason why the writer of Genesis tells us that he's not just throwing it in for good measure. The plot is developing, and the life of Joseph is developing based on that. Based on listen, we got a issue here in this family that Israel loved Joseph. It doesn't just say Israel loved Joseph, period, because it is natural for a father to love his son, and all of his children. But that's not what this says. It says Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons, and then tells us the reason: because he had been born to him in his old age. And whatever that means, I suppose it means that as he got older, and as we all get older, we look at life differently. We look at experiences differently. And here's this son who was born to him, maybe when he thought he couldn't have any more children, and so it was a son of his old age. And so there was and the younger one, of course, Benjamin was younger than Joseph, but these two sons were born to Rachel, and you got to know the story of Rachel and how he came to marry Rachel. So it's a lot that we can't get into right now, but it's right here in front of us. Uh, because he had been born to him in his old age is why he loved him more than any of his other sons. And when we love someone, uh, there are things that we do for them. And so we're told, and he made a richly ornamented robe for him. Now, we called it, and it's called in King James Version, a coat of many colors. And those of you who went to Sunday school growing up, you may recall when you learned the story of Joseph that his father made for him a coat of many colors, is what it's called. But it was a richly ornamented robe. Must have been very beautiful for him. And then verse 4, the plot thickens. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him. Strong word, but that's the word that's used. Hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. So you have the stage set here for a family feud. You have brothers who are jealous, and again, you know, most I think of the sermons we have heard and preached about this tend to blame the brothers because of their own jealousy and envy. And of course, these brothers, as we're going to see, take this a little step further. And that's why, brothers and sisters, when we talk about these sins that the Bible speaks about, jealousy and envy, uh, which, as we know, are very prevalent today. Um, I'm sure many of us have been stung by jealousy, or maybe we have been jealous and envious ourselves. Um, but but what can seem to be a small matter, oh yeah, a little jealousy, a little envy, um, can just if you feed sin, if you feed what's going to happen to what you feed, it's going to grow. So here is it. It led to them hating. So here you have jealousy, envy, hatred. Where's it going to stop? Because you just can't turn it off when you want to. So we'll see what happens to it. But first four verses of chapter 37 of Genesis, right there, we just have the seeds of something that's we know is just not going to end well in this family right now. So that's the first stage. Um, the father favors him. Um, uh, the brothers are jealous and envious of him because of the favoritism, and then their hatred and jealousy lead to what? One day, they're out in the field, they see their little brother coming. Now they hate him anyway. We need to teach him a lesson. Let's scare him to death. uh, but it was more than that. They were serious. They wanted to kill him, because that's what hatred can do and can lead to. Uh, but so they throw him in a pit, and of course one of the brothers says, "Well, let's don't kill him. Um, let's sell him into slavery." So there was a caravan on the way to Egypt. So say, "Well, let's sell him to this caravan, um, and we'll be rid of him. We won't have to worry about him anymore." Um, and so they do that. Then they have to decide now what we're gonna tell Daddy. And so they kill a goat, um, and they dip Joseph's beautiful custom coat that Daddy had made into the blood of the goat. They take it back to the father because you gotta one lie is never enough, so you gotta tell a lie to cover the lie, and then another lie, a third lie to cover the other lies, and pretty soon you're growing a basket of lies, and you know people, some people can lie so long until they don't even know it's a lie. They they think the lie is the truth. Anyway, um, they have to take the coat back to the father, and they say, tell daddy that Joseph was killed by a wild animal. See, and so they have to live with this lie and this conspiracy, uh, and in doing so, break their father's heart. See, who, by the way, had broken his father Isaac's heart when he stole the brother Esau's birthright. Another story, another time. But it comes back. It keeps, what goes around. It just, um, so anyway, uh, the father's grieving the loss of his son. What horror is that for him? The brothers are living with a lie they're on their conscience. Joseph is taken to Egypt. So now this is the second stage of his life, as I see it. First stage is he's the favorite son and he's thrown into a pit. Second stage is he's taken to Egypt, but he's given a job in a man named Potiphar's house, um, and all along, and I just want us to be aware of of uh, of what's going on, because we're talking about faith. Now you say, well, I haven't seen any faith yet. All I've seen you say is jealousy and hatred and uh, conspiracy and a grieving father and guilt-ridden sons and another son in a pit bound for Egypt. But all along in the book of Genesis, uh, chapter 39, verse 2, the Lord was with Joseph. Now, can you imagine this? The Lord, and it's like saying, really, the Lord is with Joseph. It seems somehow to make things all right, and we're waiting to see how in the world is Joseph going to work through this. You know, what is God going to do in Joseph's life, because the Lord was with Joseph. So the second stage, he's in Potiphar's house. He's a servant, but because the Lord is with him, um, he does a great job. Potiphar is so impressed. Potiphar puts him in charge of his whole household. Now, look how he starts as just a house servant, maybe slave. That's slave, house servant, and now he is the head of everything that Potiphar has. He's the, um, you know, I don't know, the steward of the house. He runs things. He takes care of bills. He makes plans, and and then it happens. It's Potiphar's wife. Potiphar's wife takes a liking to Joseph. It's a good soap opera, isn't it? Potiphar's wife takes a liking to Joseph because, uh, well, I guess she would, because, ladies, this is what is said about Joseph in verse 39, um, verse 6. So he left in Joseph's care everything he had. This is Potiphar. Potiphar. He left in Joseph's care everything he had. With Joseph in charge, he did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. Can you imagine putting somebody in charge of everything that you have, is you trust this person so completely until you ain't worried about nothing. Nothing. Put Joseph go see Joseph. He'll take care of it. But here's 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 something else. Now Joseph was well built and handsome. Okay, that's you see where this is going. Joseph was well built and handsome. You know, I guess you could be well built and not handsome, or handsome and not well built. His brothers both, sisters. And after a while, his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, "Come to bed with me." So that's the wife of Potiphar is sexually attracted to Joseph and, and invites him to engage in a relationship with her, sexual relationship with her, and he refused. Yeah, I did read that right. He refused. And this is what he says: "With me in charge," he told her, "my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns, he has entrusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I am. My master, listen, has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin, listen, against God?" There it is. How could I do such a wicked thing? So for Joseph, it just wasn't about the adultery or the fornication. It wasn't just about the trust that Potiphar had. But listen, there's a whole different meaning to this when he says, "How could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" And though she spoke to Joseph day after day now, kept coming after him, he refused to go to bed with her or even be with her. And to make a long story short, um, she doesn't take well to this, and so she finds a way to um, uh, tell her husband, a lie and say that he actually did approach me, and I screamed for help. If you read the story, very interesting story. It says, when his master heard the story, his wife told him, saying, "This is how your slave treated me." He burned with anger. Joseph's master took him, put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. So here we go. We at the end of our lesson today. But wow, what a story! What a plot! Uh, but and so we see this man, and we wonder why in the world this one little verse written about him in Hebrews. But then when we turn to his story in Genesis, this is what we find. Now we're beginning to see why he is included in this, call it a hall of fame of faith. This 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 procession of godly men and women, not certainly not perfect, flawed, all of them, but what 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 is it saying about their faith? And so the second stage ends with what happens in Potiphar's house. He's falsely accused and he's thrown into prison. I mean, can a brother get a break? I mean, jealousy and envy and hatred from his brothers. So he's thrown in a pit. Um, what would we call it? Falsely accused in Potiphar's house after he had done no wrong. In fact, he stood up as a man of courage and integrity, um, And what happens to him? He's thrown in jail. I need to say, as I wind this down, so much more about Joseph, we'll have to wait till next week. But there are times when you do the right thing. Now we've always been taught, and it's true, there's a reward in doing the right thing. We teach our children, tell the truth. Uh, Honesty is the best policy, and all of that is right. Um, but there are times when honesty can get you in trouble. There are times when uh, your own character and integrity, that there's a price to pay for doing it God's way. Sometimes there's a price to pay when you have integrity, and when you're honest, and when you are a person of moral characters. And here's what Joseph is finding out. Listen, I guess well, of course, it was before Jesus came along, but does it pay to serve Jesus, you ask? After what's happening to him, where's the reward in doing the right thing? And I think we have to teach our children sometimes that you do the right thing, whether you're rewarded or not, because sometimes your integrity and righteousness will cost you something, right? God bless you, my brothers and my sisters. Um, Please remember what I said in the beginning in terms of our 3 ways to give. Remember CrossFit tomorrow. Remember um, um, worship on Sunday at 10:15. And I also want again to make us aware that Sunday is Memorial Sunday, and for several years, that I've used that Sunday to preach a sermon. We invite all families of persons who've died in our congregation or outside of our congregation. We've invited the families to worship on the fourth Sunday in May. We call it Memorial Sunday, and I devote that Sunday to preaching sermons dealing with grief and mourning and death and dying, because I think that we need to talk about things like that. Um, it's and I think it's especially relevant now, and so and I think it's especially relevant because of the fact that we're just not able to bury our dead um, the way we're accustomed to, and the way tradition dictates, and we call it a proper funeral, proper burial. We can't do it. And that adds to the grief and to the pain, because we feel that our loved ones deserve more than that. And I want to deal with that on Sunday. So um, it's not just for monumental members. If you know someone, especially now you're going through those kind of difficult situations, uh, have them tune in on Sunday at 10:15. And also Thursday night, as I mentioned earlier, don't forget to our um, throwback Thursdays, and you'll be able to see um, one of the sermons from the past, one of my sermons from the past, or concert or something in related to monumental events from the past. God bless you, and as I said on Sunday, be safe.